all hope is lost. This is the message from the Russian soldiers currently fighting Ukraine inside the Yunikivka pocket, located in Ukraine's Sumy Oblast. These troops are starving and running low on equipment and supplies. Nothing they attempt can shield them from the Ukrainian onslaught. And Vladimir Putin is indifferent. Rather than doing everything possible to save his soldiers in Sumy, Putin has forsaken his own troops. Doomed and surrounded, these soldiers have been abandoned to die in what has become a Ukrainian kill zone. This comes from Euromaidan Press, which, in a report published on October 12th, covers the situation in Yunikivka and how Putin and the Russian military's high command are doing nothing to prevent it. The outlet details a clever strategy Ukraine has devised to handle the Russian forces that have been trying to establish a buffer zone in Sumy since summer began. Instead of engaging these Russian forces head-on, Ukraine is creating what it calls fire pockets. These pockets function as kill zones, but not in the conventional sense. Yunikivka is now another one of these fire pockets, as Ukrainian forces have encircled the Russian soldiers within the village. It would seem logical for Ukraine to assault the Russian soldiers now that the encirclement is complete. This, however, is not what is happening. Euromaidan Press reports that Ukraine is instead pursuing a long-term strategy, cutting off every supply route into Yunikivka, ensuring Russia can do nothing to rescue the soldiers it sent there. Not that it would even try. But we will address that point later on. The Ukrainian tactic seems aimed at driving the encircled Russian soldiers to insanity, with a strategy that has led to Russian soldiers killing their own comrades for trying to surrender. In Yunikivka, desperation has taken hold, and it is all thanks to a simple formula, as reported by Euromaidan Press. That formula is to take the Russian ground lines of communication under fire control, isolate and starve the Russians in Yunikivka, and then turn the trap into a kill zone without any chances of evacuation or rotation, and it is working flawlessly. Ukraine is exploiting a fundamental weakness in the Russian military's command structure. For Russia's commanders, surrendering any captured territory is out of the question, not least because of the explanation they would owe Putin. So for the soldiers trapped in Ukraine's Yunikivka kill zone, the commanders will not permit a surrender. They are expected to die instead. And that is exactly what they are doing. Severing Russian supply lines is a frequent Ukrainian tactic, one it has used extensively in Sumy. On August 25th, for instance, a Ukrainian ambush struck the convoy of Russian Lieutenant General Esadullah Abachev. The general was traveling to Sumy to help coordinate the region's already failing summer offensive, only to be maimed in a Ukrainian drone attack. Interestingly, prior to that strike, Ukraine had destroyed a bridge near Yunikivka. This suggests the current situation in the village is the culmination of weeks of diligent work by Ukrainian forces to isolate Russia's soldiers. The Guardian also reports that Ukraine has launched strikes against multiple trains, meant to deliver supplies to Russian troops in Sumy, once again demonstrating a smart strategy of cutting off Russia's forces from the necessities for an assault. This methodical destruction of supply lines is yielding remarkable results in Sumy. And now, the Russian soldiers in Yunikivka are bearing the cost. It was noted earlier that Ukraine has transformed the village into a kill zone, albeit not the kind one might typically imagine. The country has discussed drone-based kill zones before, with the concept being to use multiple drone layers to forge no-man's lands along the front lines. In September, for example, RBC Ukraine reported that Ukraine intended to establish an 18.6-mile kill zone across the front. This drone-filled zone would function as both an early warning system for Ukrainian defenders and a way to eliminate Russian soldiers long before they neared the territory they were trying to capture. Around Yunikivka, Ukraine appears to have implemented a smaller version of this kill zone. But while kill zones elsewhere are being used to supplement assaults to reclaim occupied territory, the kill zone in Yunikivka is entirely focused on making escape impossible for the trapped soldiers. This, in turn, means Ukraine does not need to launch an attack in the village. Euromaidan Press clarifies why Ukraine is avoiding this. Yunikivka's open layout with scattered and burned-out buildings offers no cover, and no reason for the Ukrainians to engage in a storming operation, which would only cost losses in an attritional battle that can hardly be won against an opponent with more troops on the ground, the outlet states. Ukraine has no desire to fight a potentially losing battle to recapture its lost village. So, as previously mentioned, it is capitalizing on the Russian obsession with holding every inch of territory it claims. Ukraine seems to be saying, "Let Russia keep Yunikivka." Why? The Russian soldiers are trapped. They cannot leave because Ukrainian drones will kill them. With their supply lines severed, Ukraine doesn't need to attack at all. Ukraine can simply wait out the occupiers in Yunikivka. Or more precisely, starve them until their only options are to surrender or die. Euromaidan Press notes that Ukraine is aware it has the advantage in every aspect within Yunikivka, except for the raw number of soldiers. It also points out that Russian forces already attempted to break out of Yunikivka, only for that attempt to be crushed by Ukraine. Now Ukraine is essentially holding Russia's soldiers captive, imprisoning them in the village they were once so proud to have taken. By doing this, Ukraine can also redirect troops it would have committed to the fight for Yunikivka to other areas in Sumy, all while the Russian soldiers in the village wait for help that will almost certainly never arrive. Eventually, those soldiers will starve. For many in Ukraine, this will be a kind of poetic justice. After all, using starvation as a tactic against Ukraine is part of Russia's history. Only, Russia did not starve Ukraine's soldiers. It targeted civilians. In June 2024, CNN reported that a collective of international human rights lawyers had accused Russia of employing starvation tactics against the civilians of Mariupol during the 85-day siege of the city in 2022. These findings came from a 76-page report that outlined how Russia has systematically attacked objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population. These objects included water supplies and electricity substations, with the former being a critical problem for Mariupol's civilians. Lacking water, they were unable to drink and had difficulty preparing many of the flour-based staples of their diet. It might be said that Ukraine is giving Russia's soldiers a taste of their own medicine in Yunikivka. It appears, however, that those soldiers won't be tasting much of anything, thanks to Ukraine's trap. That trap, according to Euromaidan Press, has been constructed along the road between Yunikivka and another Sumy settlement called Sudza. In addition, forested settlements leading into Yunikivka are now thick with drones and well within range of Ukraine-Abras artillery. Any Russian soldiers attempting to escape Yunikivka through these routes will not survive. Ukraine is also securing the area south of the road it already controls, allowing it to set up ambush sites to eliminate any escaping Russians. Ultimately, the trap is about control. The more of the forested area around Yunikivka that Ukraine controls, the fewer choices Russia has for evacuating its trapped soldiers. All that remains for Ukraine is to secure and fortify the nearby settlement of Yablunivka, and the trap will be sealed. Once that is done, the kill zone will be completely inescapable. Ukraine will never need to attack Yunikivka. It can simply wait out the Russian soldiers there, compelling them to either surrender or make suicidal escape attempts. At this point, a question naturally emerges. What does any of this have to do with Putin abandoning his troops? The simple answer is that Russia is doing very little to rescue the forces in Yunikivka from Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine is making a rescue exceptionally difficult with its encirclement of the village, but Russia does not even appear to be trying. It's almost as if Putin has written off the village and the soldiers within it as a lost cause to focus on other areas in Sumy. Yet Euromaidan Press claims there's more to it. It reports that Ukraine is discovering ample evidence that Russia is doing little to assist any of its soldiers in Sumy, whether they are in Yunikivka or in the nearby areas Ukraine is currently clearing. Among the dead Ukrainians found a phone filled with messages and videos of Russian troops complaining of hunger, no rotation, and commanders ignoring their pleas, the outlet reports. Euromaidan Press discloses the content of some of these videos and messages. It states that many Russian soldiers in Yunikivka are now speaking of relentless drone attacks and callous commanders ordering them into counterattacks in the surrounding territory. Those counterattacks are never successful. The soldiers sent on them rarely return. As already discussed, dwindling supplies are another critical problem. Surrender doesn't even seem to be an option. The outlet describes one video where a pair of Russian soldiers try to leave Yunikivka to surrender to Ukrainian troops. They do not get anywhere near their goal. As they begin walking toward Ukrainian lines with their hands in the air, Russian drones fly overhead and drop explosive munitions on them, preventing the surrender. It is brutal, and it is Putin's military. It is no surprise that the trapped soldiers in Yunikivka feel there is no hope. They are being killed for attempting to surrender, and this is by no means the first time this has occurred. Back in October 2023, the BBC reported that U.S. officials had accused Russia of executing its own soldiers if they tried to retreat from the brutal battle for Avdiivka. That battle cost Russia 5,000 soldiers, 125 armored vehicles, and an entire battalion's worth of equipment before the town fell. However, it is the executions of its own men that are most striking. This circles back to the earlier point about Russia's desperation to hold on to any territory it captures. If the country's commanders were prepared to kill their own soldiers while trying to take a settlement, there is no realistic scenario in which they would permit their troops to then give up a village. In Putin's mind, Russia's soldiers exist to fight and die. And that, coupled with Russia's apparent lack of intention to launch a rescue in Yunikivka, is how Putin is abandoning his own soldiers. That answers the how, but there remains a significant question. Why? The answer might be that Putin simply has no concern for his soldiers. That is the view of Ukraine's foreign minister, Andriy Sybiha. In June, Sybiha used X to counter several of Putin's claims, with one about Russia's soldiers being particularly notable. But, of all Putin's deranged statements today, one about the Russian soldier's foot stands out. In reality, wherever a Russian soldier sets foot, he brings along only death, destruction, and devastation, Sybiha stated. Putin does not care about Russian soldiers or their feet torn apart by Ukrainian drones. He is a mass murderer of his own people. He already disposed 1 million Russian soldiers in a senseless bloodbath in Ukraine without achieving a single strategic goal. 1 million soldiers, 2 million feet. Sybiha's remark was a response to an earlier claim by Putin that any place a Russian soldier sets foot belongs to Russia. I've said it before, Russians and Ukrainians are one people, Putin declared. In this sense, all of Ukraine is ours. There's an old rule that wherever a Russian soldier sets foot, that's ours. Ukraine's foreign minister is highlighting the absurdity of that claim, particularly as so many Russian soldiers are dying on land that is supposedly theirs. And Russia's soldiers are dying, in massive numbers. Sybiha says 1 million Russians have become casualties of the Ukraine war, but that number has significantly increased since his statement. Ukraine's Ministry of Finance highlights this, reporting that Russia has lost 1,123,950 of its soldiers between the start of Putin's invasion and October 13th. On October 12th alone, 1,140 Russian soldiers were sacrificed for Putin's ambitions, and many more thousands, possibly millions, will follow, as Putin shows no intention of stopping. Russia's leader is content to pay for Ukraine with the blood of his own soldiers, and the grim reality is that Russia is still far from achieving its goals. According to Al Jazeera, Russia currently occupies approximately 20% of Ukraine's territory. While a large portion of that territory was seized in the initial invasion phase, even an estimate of what it has cost Russia reflects very poorly on Putin's strategy. For each percent of Ukraine that Russia has taken, Putin has allowed around 56,197 of his soldiers to be killed, wounded, or captured. There is still 80% of Ukraine left to conquer. If Russia continues to suffer similar numbers to take the remainder of Ukraine, it will have lost another 4,495,800 of its soldiers by the time Ukraine is fully under its control. That is not sustainable. But to Putin, it also does not matter, because any gain, regardless of how small, is worth the price. This is according to Politico, which wrote on October 13th that Russia is absolutely hemorrhaging troops for what it terms microscopic gains. In the first 8 months of 2025, the outlet states, Russia has lost 281,550 soldiers to death, injury, or capture. But what is truly alarming is the claim from a joint report by Mediazona and the BBC, which reveals Russia's death-to-injury ratio is much worse than anticipated. Due to the lack of a normal system of evacuating the wounded from the battlefield, there are only 1.3 wounded soldiers per 1 dead, the report states. This signals a low level of survival of the wounded, who are poorly trained in tactical medicine and are usually abandoned without help after injury. The absence of a system for evacuating soldiers reveals the entire story of what is happening in Yunikivka. Putin is not leaving those soldiers to die because Russia is incapable of breaking through Ukraine's lines to reach them, even with Ukraine making that breakthrough as hard as possible. An evacuation is not happening because Putin and his inner circle care so little for their soldiers that they have not even bothered to create any clear plans for how to evacuate them when they are wounded. Why would Putin bother with that? He has millions more Russians he can send to the front lines to replace those he abandons. And this line of thinking gets to the core of why Putin is happy to abandon soldiers caught in Ukraine's trap. Russia's president views his soldiers as nothing more than cannon fodder. To him, the trapped troops in Yunikivka are merely a potential distraction for Ukraine that might enable Russian advances elsewhere. Even with Ukraine's slow and methodical approach in Yunikivka, it is still dedicating soldiers to the encirclement of the settlement. Ukraine still must use drones and artillery to block escape routes. These are all resources Ukraine cannot use anywhere else in Sumy, and that is all Putin truly sees. The abandoned troops can die for all Putin cares. At least their deaths mean Ukraine has expended another bullet or bomb. Putin's treatment of his soldiers as cannon fodder was highlighted in an October 2024 article by Leon Aaron for The Spectator. He noted that Russia is now raiding its prisons and calling upon its youngest citizens to fight in Ukraine, fully aware that many of those sent will never return. Aaron closes his article with a question. How many thousands, or more likely tens of thousands, of boys will be killed before Russians begin to oppose the war? Aaron asks. For now, no amount of protest from Russia's mothers and wives will stop the Kremlin from turning legions of their husbands and sons into cannon fodder. The soldiers in Yunikivka are just more numbers to be added to those Putin has already sacrificed. They have outlived their purpose as an offensive threat, so Putin is content to let them die. However, there is something about Putin's callousness he seemingly fails to grasp. Abandoning soldiers erodes Russia's combat effectiveness. Jack Watling of The Guardian made this point back in March 2022, and his words have been prophetic. Russia's ruthless treatment of its own soldiers, while concealable at a small scale, has now brought about operational repercussions, Watling wrote. He went on to explain that Putin and his cronies had neglected to tell their soldiers how they planned to wage war after the initial invasion faltered. This left Russia with an army that was unprepared, logistically and psychologically, to fight the type of war it is now engaged in. Planning was discarded, and the slow advance seen after the initial invasion was a symptom of a military that does not care about the people who are its lifeblood. In the 3.5 years since Watling wrote those words, nothing has changed. Russia's pace of advance remains glacial. It is losing more soldiers than ever, and Putin appears unconcerned. This is why there is no hope for the Russian troops trapped in Yunikivka. Putin's entire war against Ukraine has, by design, revolved around sacrificing soldiers to make gains. The Yunikivka soldiers achieved a small gain. Now they are paying an immense price because Putin will not allow his soldiers to do anything but hold their ground or fight, even when he knows they stand no chance of winning. In the end, low Russian morale may be what unravels Putin's plans. In fact, this very issue may already be leading to the collapse of the Russian army. Putin's military is bleeding troops, with 70,000 of Russia's soldiers having gone AWOL due to the kind of treatment Putin subjects them to. Learn more in our video, and don't forget to subscribe to Warzone Party for more videos covering the events in the Sumy direction.